Before a bullet was ever fired, before sails creaked or flags unfurled, there was only silence and hunger. We were a tired people, son, lean and sinewed from winters that didn't end when the snow melted. When you live in a place like Machias, survival ain't a season, it's a sentence. We worked the forest and feared God in that order. By June of '75, we were weeks into hardship. The kind where stew is just hot water in a memory. The British held Boston like a clenched fist, and that fist had strangled the trade routes tight. We weren't starving yet, but we could see it from where we stood. And then came Ichabod Jones, a loyalist, clean coat, sharper tongue. He sailed into our harbor with ships full of flour, pork, molasses, and a warship, the Margaretta. I remember the morning she came into view, the Margaretta, big, black, and slow-moving, like she didn't need to hurry because fear already went ahead and made introductions. She didn't come in firing. Hell, she didn't need to. Just floated past the rocks like death on furlough. Her sails caught just enough wind to keep her in control, but not enough to show off. It was a flex, a warning wrapped in courtesy. The crew didn't wave. They didn't need to. Their presence did the talking. Powder stacked below, brass glinting on the deck, and those eyes, those damn redcoats looking out like they'd already marked their targets. Jones stepped off the poly like a merchant with a crown. He didn't walk, he presented. Boots polished, hands behind his back, like he wasn't just bringing flour and pork, but dominion. He walked through town like a man inspecting livestock. Didn't stop to chat, just nodded. Smiled once, thin and slow. That kind of smile you see right before a wolf bites. People peeked from behind curtains. Mothers pulled kids inside. The men tried not to stare, but you could feel their shoulders tighten. The sun hadn't yet risen when word came. Moore was hosting a Sunday sermon of his own, not in pews, but in posture. That ship didn't shift an inch overnight, but its presence weighed more than stone. Inside the old church, the air was thick with candle smoke and choices. Reverend Lyons stood at the front, hands raised like peace could still be negotiated. He spoke of survival, of patience, said charity sometimes wore strange clothes, and that we ought to meet the moment with grace. But Foster wasn't praying. He leaned forward, elbows to knees, jaw locked, his Bible closed. The kind of stillness you see in a man just before he lifts something heavy. O'Brien was near the door, quiet, always quiet. His eyes moved more than his mouth. The kind of man who watches storms gather before they break. And then the back doors creaked, and in walked Jones. Didn't bow his head, didn't take off his hat, just strolled in like the sermon was his to edit. They held the vote in the church, our place of hymns and harvest blessings. But that day it felt like a courtroom, and every bench a jury box. The air was thick, not with incense or prayer, but with dread. You could hear the breaths between glances. Wood creaked louder than words. And when the doors shut, it was like sealing a tomb. Reverend Lyons opened with scripture, voice trembling like a leaf in stormlight. He spoke of providence, of trusting the path even when it forked toward hardship. But even he didn't sound convinced. His hands shook as he turned the pages. Ichabod Jones stood at the rear, not seated, not invited, but there, just standing, watching, arms folded, eyes half-lidded, like the outcome was already carved into the floorboards. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The Margaretta's presence outside said enough. She loomed like judgment, her cannons invisible but felt. You didn't need to see the iron to feel the weight. O'Brien leaned against a post near the back, quiet as a ghost. You'd think he wasn't listening. But that man heard more in silence than most did in sermons. He watched the storm coming through a crack in the wood like he knew it by name. Foster couldn't hide his fire. His hands gripped the pew like it might jump away. The veins in his forearms bulged. When he spoke, it wasn't with polish. It was with polish. It was with pain. He called it what it was, coercion. He said, "This ain't trade. It's tribute dressed like kindness." But his words hit a wall. Folks didn't argue, not because they agreed, but because they were tired. Worn down by hunger, by cold nights, by fear wrapped in redcoats. Once the vote was done and the barrels rolled ashore, the streets wore the silence of a town trying not to choke. We traded timber for bread, but it didn't taste like victory. The flour felt heavier than stone. We knew what we'd done. And worse, we knew what it meant. That night, the tavern filled quicker than a spring creek. Not with laughter, not with song, but with stares and steam and men who just swallowed pride with their supper. It was a low-roofed room that creaked with memory. The hearth spat tired sparks. No music, no dice, just the quiet clink of mugs and the scrape of boots. O'Brien was there. Of course he was. Of course he was. He always showed up when things got quiet enough to mean something. He said little. Just sat with his cup, eyes narrowed, listening more than drinking. Foster stomped in not long after, still red from the council's shame. He didn't sit. He paced. Said we were fools for bending, that we'd only invited more chains. And no one argued, not because he was wrong, but because he was right. Then others started speaking, men who'd never raised their voices before. Farmers, carpenters, fishermen. They weren't soldiers, but that night you'd swear they were forging something in that room. Sunday came dressed like any other. Clean shirts, quiet footsteps, the smell of pine soap and borrowed faith. But Machias wasn't just headed to church that morning. We were headed to war. Most just didn't know it yet. The plan was set, cracked and risky like a raft made of promises. O'Brien and Foster had drawn the path. Catch the Margaretta unready, take her crew by surprise, and sail her as our own. But they needed the town behind them, and the town needed a push, so they waited. Let the sun rise slow. Let the bells call the faithful. Let Jones and the British feel safe in a church full of whispers and bowed heads. I sat in the back pew. Dirt still under my nails, hands folded like a loyal subject. But my heart beat like musket fire. My ribs remembered every winter that Crown never fed. Reverend Lyons preached of grace, but his eyes were scanning the benches. He knew. Not the details, but the danger. And if God was in that room, he wasn't the only one watching. It was just past dawn when the tide turned. For us, and for history. They didn't march. They glided. Unity and liberty rode out under a blanket of fog that swallowed the oars whole. It wasn't an army that approached the Margaretta. It was ghosts. Hardened men with rough hands and eyes that had already buried friends. Oars dipped with reverence, wrapped in cloth to keep silence sacred. They didn't look at each other. No need. Every man on those boats knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about one ship. This was about sending a message. That tyranny couldn't dock wherever it pleased. Foster stood at the front of Unity, jaw like iron, hands shaking not with fear but readiness. Behind him, O'Brien rode Liberty like a shadow, silent, steady, unblinking. They weren't soldiers by trade, but that morning they were gods of their own choosing. The Margaretta loomed in the mist, her sails idle. her gun ports shut like slitted eyes. Most of her crew still slept, bellies full and heads light from rum. Victory don't come cheap, and it don't come clean. The Margaretta sat bleeding into the bay, her timbers groaning like a wounded animal. Her Union Jack was gone, and in its place a ragged cloth flapped wild in the morning breeze. There were no cheers, just the smell of powder and the silence that follows men who've done something irreversible. The dead were counted first. Both sides. Moore lay still at the edge of the deck, saber loose in his hand. For all his imperial pride, he died looking like a boy in the wrong place. We wrapped the bodies in whatever we could find. Sails, blankets, coats of men too wounded to stand. Foster didn't say a word. He just kept moving, shoulder bandaged, jaw clenched,